Hello friends, today I want to read to you the first little bit of Moo by Sharon Creech. And this is a book in verse, so it doesn't really have chapters per se, and a lot of the pages have lots of extra white space. So I'm just going to read the first couple entries here. That Zora. The truth is, she was ornery and stubborn, wouldn't listen to anybody, and selfish beyond selfish, and filthy, caked with mud and dust, and moody. You better watch it or she'd knock you flat. That's Zora I'm talking about. Nobody wanted anything to do with her. Zora, that cow. But first, before Zora. I am Rena, 12 years old and 2 months old, formerly of a big city, a city of monuments and people of many colors, a harlequin city of sights and noises, of museums and parks and music and cockroaches and rats and mosquitoes and crickets and fireworks and traffic and helicopters whopping overhead and sirens screaming through the air. And that's how we lived for a time, me and my parents and my brother, zooming on the subway or creeping along in buses or cars into and around the city, trawling through the museums, ogling the dinosaurs and artifacts, ambling through the zoo, listening to the roars and screeches and scrabbles and warbles, and staring at the lazy crawls of bored animals. Yes, for a time, that's how we lived. Flight path. Then one day, when we were stuck in traffic, behind a tall gray bus spewing exhaust, with horns honking and people yelling and sirens wailing, on a day that was hotter than hot, my mother asked my father a question. A question can swirl your world. My parents had recently lost their jobs when the newspaper they worked for went out of business. We were on our way to drop my father off for another job interview. So, my mother said, "Do you still like reporting?" "Not so much," my father admitted. "Is that what you see yourself doing 10 years from now?" Because that's the flight path we're on." I was sitting in the back seat with my brother Luke, a 7-year-old complexity. Sometimes he acted as if he were 2, and sometimes 12. He was full of questions and energy and opinions, except when you wanted him to have any of those things. Luke was drawing with a black marker in the yellow notebook that was always with him. He drew for hours and hours, contorting heroes, leaping and jumping and vaporizing, bizarre enemies with gaping mouths and sharp talons and horns, and complicated towns with alleys and bridges and dungeons. In the car, when Mum said, "Because that's the flight path we're on," Luke said, "Flight path? We're not in an airplane, you know. We're in a car, and we're on a road." But I noticed that he was adding a runway and an airplane to his drawing. Drivers all around us were honking their horns like crazy, and smells and the heat and the noise were pouring in the windows and squeezing us from all sides. "Let's get out of here," my mother said. My father took his hands off the wheel and raised his palms to the sky. "No, I mean out of the city," my mother said. "Let's move." "To Maine," I said. My parents turned to look at me. Then they looked at each other. Then they looked at me again. "Maine," they said. "Of course." My parents had met in Maine many years ago, and when they spoke of Maine, their voices had the glint of sea and sky. In the car that day, Maine just popped out of my head. I hadn't expected that they would take me seriously. I'm glad I didn't say Siberia. Which is how I came to meet Zora. Though not quite so easily as it might sound, because first we had to give our landlord a month's notice, and then we had to clear out all of our closets and cupboards and the dreaded storage garage. Then we had to lug some of that outside for a yard sale and the rest to the Salvation Army. And then we had to clean and watch as future renters tromped through our rooms, noting how small they were and how old and how dark, and it was embarrassing. And then there was the packing and moving of the beds and clothes and books and pots and pans. Oh, it hurts my head to remember it, so let's skip it. People said, my parents' friends said, "Are you crazy?" And "It gets cold in Maine, you know." And There are giant mosquitoes in Maine. And it gets cold in Maine, you know. And why? Why? But some others said they have lots of lobsters there, and great blueberries in Maine, and beautiful ocean and mountains, and great skiing, and lots of lobsters, lots of blueberries. Though it does get cold there, you know. Luke said, "How did this happen, this moving thing?" In his yellow notebook, Luke drew a winged dragon, scaled in gold, flying through purple skies, grasping a house, a car, beds, tables, and chairs in its black talons. Why Maine? Why did I say Maine that day? Let's move to Maine. Because I'd read a book about it. 3 books, in fact. 2 were stories about a family's life on an island in Maine, and 1 was a book of photographs of rocky shores and lighthouses and vast oceans with breaking waves and high blue mountains. And while I was reading those books and looking at those pictures, I was already there in my mind. I was clambering over rocks and wading in the ocean. I was hiking up a mountain and standing at the top, peering down the steep hillsides to the ocean beyond. I was there. Maine. It had such a sound to it, such a feel. And yet, I'd always lived in the city. I was full of buses and subways and traffic and tall buildings and crowds of people and city noises, honking and sirens and helicopter whirring, and city smells, bakeries and car exhaust, hot dogs and coffee, and city lights so bright. Was the room inside for the sights and sounds and smells of Maine? Would I know what to do and how to be in Maine?